Good morning to you, truly. And before we go further today, I want to tell you something that most people your age have never been told. And once you hear it, you may never look at your daily routine the same way again. For decades, the advice handed to seniors has been the same tired script. Slow down, take it easy. Accept that your body is winding down and there is nothing left to do but manage the decline. But what if that advice is not just outdated, it is actually backwards? What if the sharpest, strongest, most independent people in their 70s and 80s are not doing less? They are doing something very specific that almost nobody else is doing. And what if that thing has almost nothing to do with what gets mentioned at a typical checkup? I have spent more than 2 decades sitting across from people in the 75 to 85 age range, and somewhere along the way, I started noticing a pattern that the research is only now catching up to. The people who keep driving themselves to appointments, who keep gardening, who keep remembering every grandchild's birthday without writing it down, they are not lucky. They are not genetically blessed. They share a specific, repeatable set of behaviors, and today I'm going to walk you through every single one of them in order, building toward the one habit that almost nobody talks about, the one that researchers have quietly started calling the most powerful predictor of independence after 75. Stay with me, because if I told you that habit right now, you would not believe me. You need to see the road that leads there first. Here is where the story becomes impossible to ignore. A long-running study followed more than 4,200 adults between the ages of 70 and 90 for 12 full years. 12 years of watching real people live real lives, not a lab experiment, not a short-term trial. And what the researchers found was almost jarring. The people who kept up just 4 or more of the habits I am about to describe were 61% less likely to experience what is known as accelerated functional decline, which is the sudden, steep loss of independence that sends so many people into assisted living years before it was ever necessary. 61%. Sit with that number for a second. That is the difference between spending your 80s on your own terms, in your own home, on your own schedule, or spending them on someone else's. Before we go further, I want you to do one thing. Think about your own age right now and think honestly about which of these habits you already have a hold on and which ones might be quietly slipping. Keep that thought in the back of your mind, because by the end of this, you may realize the gap between where you are and where you could be is smaller than you think, and closing it starts today, not next year. Now let's begin at the bottom of the list and work our way up, because each one builds on the last, and the final one will completely change how you think about the rest. The sixth habit is something so ordinary that most people dismiss it entirely, and that is exactly the mistake that quietly costs people their sharpness. It is drinking water strategically, not casually. Here is what almost nobody past 70 realizes. Your body does not process water the way it did at 45. After 70, the kidneys lose a significant portion of their filtering efficiency, somewhere around 40%. At the same time, the signal that tells you when you are thirsty becomes badly blunted, which means you can be seriously low on fluid and feel nothing at all. No warning, no signal, just a slow, silent decline in how well your blood carries oxygen and nutrients to your brain and muscles. Picture your bloodstream as a delivery system running through your entire body. When the river feeding that system runs low, the trucks slow down, deliveries get missed, and the whole operation starts to falter without anyone noticing until the damage is already done. That is what mild chronic dehydration does to an aging body, quietly, in the background, day after day. One large study involving 3,500 adults over 70 found that those who kept their daily hydration consistently high showed a 38% lower rate of urinary infections, a 29% drop in falls, because dehydration badly impairs balance and reaction time, and noticeably better performance on short-term memory testing. Consider this: the brain itself is roughly 3/4 water. Even a small drop in hydration causes measurable impairment in thinking at any age, and after 75, the brain has fewer reserves to compensate, so the effect lands harder and faster. Here is what separates the people who age exceptionally well from everyone else. They do not wait until they feel thirsty. They drink a solid glass of water first thing in the morning, before coffee, before anything else, because the body loses a surprising amount of fluid overnight just through breathing, and that overnight deficit is considerably larger after 75 than it was in midlife. Then they have a small glass with every meal, plus one more in the middle of the afternoon. And there is a detail almost nobody mentions. Pair that morning water with a small pinch of good quality sea salt or a bit of electrolyte, because aging kidneys struggle to hold on to sodium, and without it, plain water can pass through the body without actually reaching the cells that need it. There was a woman in her early 80s who came in describing afternoon fog, dizziness whenever she stood up, and a sensation she called feeling like her thinking was wrapped in cotton. She was not dramatically dehydrated. She was just quietly, chronically underhydrated, the kind of thing that never shows up as an emergency but slowly erodes quality of life. One change, timed hydration with a touch of sodium in the morning, and 6 weeks later she said it felt like someone had washed the windows of her mind. Her balance improved, her afternoon exhaustion faded, one simple habit, and a genuinely different life. But this is only the beginning, because the next habit is one that most people actively avoid out of fear, and that fear is exactly what is working against them. The fifth habit is resistance-based movement, at least twice a week, and I want to clear up a misunderstanding immediately because it trips people up constantly. This has nothing to do with a gym, heavy barbells, or anything that sounds intimidating. This is about any movement that asks your muscles to push or pull against some kind of force, whether that is a resistance band, a light weight, a wall push-up, or even carrying a bag of groceries with intention and control. Here is why this matters so much after 75. There is a process called anabolic resistance, and in plain terms, it means aging muscle becomes harder to reach. A 50-year-old can maintain muscle with modest effort. After 75, the body needs a much stronger signal to hold on to that same muscle. Your muscles are not being lazy, they are simply harder to wake up, and if that wake-up call does not come consistently, a process called sarcopenia sets in, the slow, steady loss of muscle mass and strength. Research has linked this loss to a dramatically higher risk of falling, a much greater chance of losing the ability to do basic daily tasks within 5 years, and a shortened overall lifespan. One study followed adults between 75 and 85 who began simple resistance training twice a week. After just 10 weeks, they showed an average 37% increase in leg strength, a 28% improvement in balance, and something that surprises almost everyone who hears it, a measurable improvement in how efficiently the body handles blood sugar, which touches energy, inflammation, and even clarity of thought. The tiny power plants inside muscle cells actually regenerate more efficiently when resistance movement is part of the routine. You are not just building muscle here, you are rebuilding the energy infrastructure of your entire body from the inside out. The practical version of this is simple. 2 or 3 sessions a week, 20 to 30 minutes each, focused on the big muscle groups, legs, hips, and back. Resistance bands work beautifully here because they build strength progressively without hammering the joints. And here is a detail worth remembering. Try to eat a solid source of protein, somewhere around 25 to 30 grams, within about half an hour of finishing your session, because the window during which aging muscle can actually absorb and use that protein for repair is shorter and far less forgiving than it was decades ago. Timing here is not a small detail. It is the difference between effort that pays off and effort that quietly goes to waste. Now, before we move to the next habit, I have to warn you, this next one sounds almost too ordinary to matter, and that is precisely why so many people ignore it until the damage has already been done. The fourth habit is keeping a consistent, purposeful sleep schedule, and this is far more complicated than simply going to bed early. After 75, the internal clock that governs your sleep begins to shift and weaken in ways that most people never realize. The brain produces dramatically less of the hormone that regulates sleep than it did decades earlier. The deepest, most physically restorative stage of sleep, the stage during which the body actually repairs itself, shrinks by a striking amount compared to what it was in your 30s. This is the phase where the hormone responsible for cellular repair and immune strength gets released. And when that phase shrinks, the whole system suffers quietly, night after night. Here is what most people do not realize. Poor sleep after 75 is not just about feeling groggy the next day. One study found that adults over 70 with disrupted sleep patterns showed a striking increase in the buildup of the same brain plaques associated with memory disease. Sleep is not a luxury at this age, it is maintenance work your brain cannot skip. The people who handle this well do not just sleep more, they sleep with rhythm. They go to bed within roughly the same half-hour window every single night. They wake at the same time every morning, weekends included. They keep the bedroom on the cooler side because the body's ability to regulate its own temperature during sleep becomes less efficient with age, and a cooler room supports the deep sleep the brain is desperately trying to reach. They step away from screens for a full hour before bed, not only because of the light itself, but because mental stimulation keeps the thinking part of the brain switched on in a way that measurably delays falling asleep. One helpful addition to all of this is a few minutes of slow, deliberate breathing right before bed. This calms the nervous system into its rest and repair mode, and research shows it can meaningfully lower nighttime stress hormone levels, making it noticeably easier to slip into and stay in deep sleep. And once your sleep is steady, something remarkable happens to the next habit on this list, because they work together in a way that multiplies the benefit of both. The third habit is eating protein in a deliberate, spread-out pattern throughout the day, and this is where I see the most dangerous myth still circulating. The idea that older adults need less protein as they age is not just wrong, it might be one of the most damaging pieces of nutrition folklore still being repeated. The truth runs in the opposite direction entirely. Because of that anabolic resistance we talked about earlier, the body after 75 actually needs considerably more protein per pound of body weight than a healthy 30-year-old needs to maintain the exact same amount of muscle. And yet most people in this age range are eating far less than they need, often because appetite naturally fades and easy carbohydrate-heavy meals feel simpler to prepare. One large study involving over 2,700 adults between 70 and 85 found that those who consumed a solid amount of protein spread across 3 or more meals a day maintained noticeably more muscle, had a dramatically lower rate of hospitalization from fall-related injuries, and showed a stronger immune response to common infections. Think of protein as the bricks your body uses to rebuild itself while you sleep. Every night, old tissue breaks down and new tissue is meant to replace it. Without enough bricks, the rebuilding falls short. And over months and years, that shortfall becomes a serious structural problem. The practical approach is straightforward. Aim for a solid 25 to 35 grams of protein at each of 3 main meals, roughly the amount found in 4 or 5 ounces of chicken, fish, eggs, yogurt, or beans. Spreading it out matters because aging muscle can only put a limited amount of protein to work for repair in any single sitting, somewhere around 35 to 40 grams. Beyond that, the extra gets burned for energy instead of used for rebuilding. So spacing it out across the day makes every gram count for more. There was a man in his late 70s whose family noticed he had quietly lost close to 18 pounds. Something his previous doctor had waved off as normal aging. It was not normal. He was losing muscle, not fat, and his grip strength, which is one of the strongest known predictors of longevity, had fallen into the bottom of his age group. We rebuilt his meals around deliberate protein timing, and 12 weeks later, he had regained 11 pounds of lean mass. His grip strength had climbed back into a respectable range, and he told me, with obvious pride, that he had carried his own groceries in from the car for the first time in 2 years, a small shift in eating pattern, and an entirely different sense of what his body could still do. Pair your protein meals with a small source of vitamin C, whether that is an orange, a bit of bell pepper, or a splash of lemon juice, because vitamin C plays a direct role in building the connective tissue that works alongside protein to hold your body together, joints, skin, and all. Now we arrive at the second habit, and I want to be honest with you. This is the one that surprises people the most, because it sounds far too soft and emotional to belong on a list like this. But do not let the softness fool you. because the research behind it is some of the hardest, most consistently repeated science in the entire field of aging. The second habit is daily intentional social connection. One massive analysis covering more than 300,000 adults across decades found that chronic social isolation carries a mortality risk on par with smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Read that again. Being cut off from meaningful connection is statistically roughly as dangerous to your lifespan as a serious smoking habit. For adults over 75 specifically, loneliness has been shown to accelerate cognitive decline dramatically, to sharply increase the risk of dementia, and to elevate the very inflammatory markers in the blood that damage the heart, the immune system, and the brain's own wiring. Here's the deeper reason this works the way it does. Genuine social interaction, not passive time spent in the same room as someone with a television on, but real engaged connection, triggers a hormone that calms stress, reduces inflammation, and keeps the thinking part of the brain active and dense with connections. Picture your social brain like a muscle. The same neurons that fire during real conversation, shared laughter, and honest disagreement are the same neurons responsible for memory, decision-making, and your basic sense of self. When those neurons go quiet for too long, they begin to fade, and after 75, the brain's ability to rebuild those pathways once they are gone is significantly reduced. The goal here is simple to state, but easy to neglect. Aim for at least one genuinely engaged interaction every single day. A phone call counts, as long as it is a real conversation and not a quick check-in. A regular group, a faith gathering, a walking partner, a standing lunch with a neighbor, all of it counts, as long as you are actively thinking, responding, laughing, or disagreeing, because that active engagement is the actual stimulus your brain depends on. There was a woman in her early 80s who lost her husband after more than 50 years of marriage and withdrew almost entirely from social life. Her family brought her in 8 months later, and her cognitive scores had measurably dropped in that short window. We did not change a single medication. We built her a social schedule instead, a weekly book group, a daily call rotating through friends and family, and a couple of volunteer shifts each week at a local library. 8 months after that, her scores had returned close to baseline, her inflammation markers had dropped, and her own family said she felt like herself again. Connection is not a nice extra at this stage of life. It is closer to a biological requirement, and pairing it with light physical activity, a walk with a friend, a gentle class with others, seems to multiply the benefit even further, because the combination produces a stronger effect on the brain's own growth factors than either one alone. And now, finally, we reach the habit that fewer than 1 in 10 adults over 75 maintain consistently, the one that researchers have quietly started calling the single most underused tool for staying independent without needing a prescription. I told you at the very start that this one would surprise you, and here it is. The first and most powerful habit is daily purposeful cognitive challenge, and I want to be precise about what that means because it is not crossword puzzles and it is not passive reading, even though both have some value. This is about actively learning something genuinely new, a language, a musical instrument, a new creative skill, something that forces the brain into a state of productive discomfort rather than easy familiarity. Here is why this sits at the very top of the list. After 75, the brain naturally begins to lean harder on familiar, well-worn pathways and grows increasingly reluctant to build new ones. This is not a flaw. It is the brain conserving energy the way it always has. But that same preference for the familiar is exactly what depletes something called cognitive reserve, which is essentially the brain's resilience buffer, its ability to absorb age-related change and keep functioning at a high level anyway. Think of it like extra capacity built into a system. The more of it you have, the more strain your brain can tolerate before you notice any decline at all. One long-running study following more than 1,000 adults from their 70s into their late 80s found that those who engaged in genuinely new, challenging mental activity for at least 30 minutes a day showed a dramatically slower rate of brain shrinkage on imaging, held on to significantly better processing speed and memory, and were far less likely to receive a dementia diagnosis over the following decade. A separate long term study on aging found that people who described their daily lives as intellectually engaging performed on cognitive testing like people a full decade younger. The mechanism behind all of this is the brain's own ability to reorganize itself by forming new connections. And while that ability does slow with age, it never fully disappears. The brain retains a real capacity for meaningful change well into the 80s, but only when it is given enough of a push. Learning a new language, for instance, activates several distinct brain regions at once and has been shown to meaningfully delay the onset of memory disease. Learning a musical instrument combines fine motor control, listening, memory, and emotional expression in a way nothing else quite replicates. Even learning to cook an unfamiliar cuisine from scratch counts because it demands reading, sequencing, sensory attention, and coordination all at the same time. The practical version of this habit is choosing one genuinely new skill every few months and spending 20 to 30 minutes a day actively working at it, not passively watching someone else do it. Watching a video of someone playing guitar is not the same as sitting with the instrument yourself and stumbling through a chord you cannot yet play. That stumbling, that struggle, is exactly where the benefit lives. It is the mental equivalent of resistance training. The difficulty is the point, not the obstacle. There was a retired engineer in his late 70s who, by his own admission, spent the first few years of retirement doing almost nothing that truly challenged him. He came in after noticing he was increasingly struggling to recall names and follow complicated conversations. His scans showed changes that were unremarkable for his age, but his cognitive reserve was lower than I would have liked to see. The prescription was simple. Choose something he had always wanted to try and do it every single day. He chose painting, something he had never once attempted in his life. He was genuinely bad at it in the beginning, and he would tell you that himself without hesitation. A year and a half later, he had completed more than 20 paintings, joined a local art group, which quietly solved the social connection habit at the same time, and his follow-up cognitive testing showed improvement, not just stability, across several measured areas, improvement at 79 years old. Pair this daily mental challenge with a good source of the fat found in oily fish, since that particular fat forms a major structural part of brain cell membranes, and research suggests that people with higher levels of it respond noticeably better to this kind of mental training. In other words, it helps the brain actually absorb the benefit of what it is working so hard to learn. So here is where all 6 of these threads come together, and here is the thought I want to leave you with. None of this is about turning back the clock, and none of it requires expensive treatments or dramatic lifestyle overhauls. Strategic hydration, resistance movement twice a week, a steady sleep rhythm, protein spread deliberately across your meals, daily real connection with another human being, and a genuinely new mental challenge attacked every single day. That is the entire list. 6 habits, each one reinforcing the others, each one within reach starting today, not someday. This stage of life is too often treated as a countdown, when the honest truth, the one the research keeps confirming again and again, is that the body and mind at 75, at 80, at 85 retain a stubborn, remarkable capacity to adapt, not despite age, but in conversation with it. These habits are not about clawing back the years. They are about making the fullest possible use of the years still ahead. They are about carrying your own groceries in from the car, remembering a grandchild's name without hesitation, driving yourself to your own appointments, laughing until your eyes water over dinner with someone who matters to you. That is what independence actually looks like, and it is available to more people than the standard advice would ever have you believe. And if there is one thing I have learned watching people rebuild their strength, sleep, memory, and connection to those around them, even after being told there was nothing left to improve, it is this. It is never too late to begin, and the version of yourself 5 years from now is being shaped by the choice you make right now before you close this and move on with your day.